Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So today I'm in my parents' garden, and the main focus of this video will actually be the update of the climbing rose there. I've done several videos on it in the past where I've pruned it and certainly how to do winter pruning, and it's now midsummer. It's probably just about at its peak, so I'd like to give you guys an update of that. But whilst I'm here, there's quite a few other nice plants to talk about. So I'll start off here at my mother's wildflower garden. So this was sown with mainly annuals and a couple of perennial wildflowers. The last few years have mainly been annual flowers, but what happens is over time, if you don't disturb the soil, the annual ones get outcompeted by the perennial plants. So that's why we've got loads of these oxeye daisies now. So it does need a bit of renovation next year. If we just left it, it looks like this will just get taken over by oxeye daisies and there wouldn't be any other wildflowers. So we'll need to disturb the soil, maybe even put in a few new seeds, although there should be a lot of dormant seeds, especially from things like poppies still in the ground. So we definitely need to do something, but it does give a great display. So this was probably actually at its peak a few weeks ago. It's still looking good though. You can see a lot of the heads have gone over, and it does flower for the whole summer on and off. The best display is probably early July, end of June. It's now mid-July and you can see it's just starting to go over, but it's still giving a particularly nice display at the moment. So I might do an update video on this later on if it needs some renovation work. At the moment, as I say, it's mainly oxeye daisies. Occasionally we need to take out these nettles. You can see there's a few nettles there which are springing up. And we've also got these umbelliferae flowers. I'm not sure what variety these are. They look a little bit like cow parsley, but they're definitely not cow parsley because these have come up much later and they've got that nice kind of pink colour to them. But they're great for things like hoverflies, and you can actually see there's a hoverfly just landing on that one just there. I'm mainly going to focus on the climbing rose here. This has been flowering for now over a month, but the first lot of flowers, it was quite sparse, but it's now just about at full flowering. So I did give this a really hard prune back in the winter, and that helped to clean it up a bit, make sure they had enough space for growth. And this side's done quite well, it's not too congested. But because the other side's a lot sunnier, that side tends to flower better, but also gets too congested because the plant wants to put all its growth into the sunniest side. So once the flowers are finished, I'm actually going to cut that side really hard, make sure that it gets a bit clearer. If you cut it hard in summer, it kind of makes it less likely to grow. If you cut it hard in winter, you just encourage more growth. So if you want to discourage growth, the time to do that is the summertime. But this side, as you can see, there's not anything too long coming on for training for next year. What I do have is two here. Unfortunately, these aren't in the right position where I'd like them to grow. And what I'm looking for is new runners to train onto the rest of this wall, because I've recently put a wire at the top and there is another wire lower down, but I need to put in some more wires at a later date once the plant gets bigger. I would like to continue the plant further along here, but as I say, it's primarily wanting to grow on the sunniest side, so it's going to be a bit difficult to get this to grow that way until I start removing more of the material from the sunny side. So we do have a few runners in this section. This one at the back though looks promising. What I might do is take out these two shoots, just have the one main shoot, and then that will put the energy into that and I can train it right across. There's also a lot of deadheading that needs to be done on this soon. I have been deadheading it so far this year. I've not deadheaded it for a week, so you can see there's quite a few tatty flowers, and the flowers, we've had some strong winds, about 30-40 mile an hour gusts, so that's why they're looking a bit more dry than they would normally. So there was a bit of damage from that, but I'll take you around now to get a better view. So this is probably the best view of the climbing rose. You can see here this side does flower a little bit better, and there's a lot more growth just because it's that much sunnier. This is quite a nice climbing rose because it really does flower for a long period of time. So what happens with this is it sends up clusters of flowers. These clusters of flowers, they don't all open at the same time. You can see there's such as this here. What tends to happen is you get one that starts off flowering, then you get 3 or 4 flowering at once just after that. So for example, this cluster here, there's 3 or 4, and then you'll just get 1 or 2 little buds, which are probably these ones which are further back here and less developed. They'll probably continue flowering a month after that. So each kind of stem flowers for at least a month. Once it's finished flowering, what I'll do is cut the stem right back to the main base, and that hard prune will encourage more growth to come back as the plant tries to compensate, and we'll get some more flowers coming on from that. If I didn't prune it back hard, we still would get flowers, because you can see there's some new growth coming up here, and these ones do have some new flower buds starting to appear. But with pruning it back hard, I'm going to get a second flush of flowers, and to be honest, I would expect this to keep flowering right through to the frosts. And because my parents are right next to the sea, you see it's just a few hundred meters way over there, they do actually have quite mild winters, so I should expect flowers on this in November, December even. So I might do an update video when I do a hard prune kind of midsummer, because I need to remove a lot of these flowered branches and encourage more flowering. And also I do need to thin this section as well. So I'm quite happy with how it's done. It has got a bit congested on this side, but generally it's flowered well. The pruning has really helped it flower. What I did is I made sure all the branches were laid on their side. That encourages lots of short growth which flowers, and not lots of long growth with leaves. So it's done really well, flowered lots, but I will also need to prune it because it's starting to get into the path here. But I'm just going to let it flower at its fullest for now. So I'd like to also give you an update on the front section here. Now, we did have an amazing display of foxgloves. They're quite an early summer flower, so I can't really get them at the same time as this. So they've all gone over mostly, but we do have some sunflowers coming up now. So I planted all these quite a while ago. The soil here isn't that great. It's very sandy, and it's just kind of drainage area for the house, so there's a lot of gravel and sand, so the soil isn't great. So for that reason the sunflowers haven't grown to their full potential. They're only about 5 foot tall, but it's nice to get some flowers from them at least. And looking down here, I can show you the foxgloves I was talking about. So unfortunately the foxgloves are mostly finished now, and you can see all the seed heads here. What my parents often do is they leave the seed heads and let it sow naturally, self-seed all over the gravel area, and then we get lots of flowers the next year. But you've got a couple of options with foxgloves. Most books will say they're biennial, so they'll grow as leaves in the first year, flower the second year, then die. But if you cut the seed heads off, you can actually make the plant live for several years. The reason is what the plant wants to do is it wants to flower, put all the energy it has left in it into the seeds, and then die. But if you cut the seeds off, then it's got all that energy still, and it hasn't put it into the seeds. What it will do is to send up some more flower shoots that summer and do a second flush of flowers. If you then cut off that second seed head, what it will do, instead of putting all its energy into the seeds and dies, it will then put energy into the leaves and roots, and it will grow a second flush of leaves, and then the next year you'll get flowers again. So you can turn them into perennials if you keep deadheading them. My parents generally just let them self-seed. I think just to try and get a few more in this area, but we could start deadheading some of them now because we've got some quite nice ones coming along here. This one down here, for example, is a particularly big one with nice flowers. There's a couple of varieties here. Most of them are pink though. So coming along, we've also got a nice fuchsia, and the above that is the Wisteria, which has grown really well. I'll need to do a bit more pruning. It grows so quickly, so this has probably just appeared in the last week. I need to train some of these a little bit further along, but it's pretty much filled all the wires for now, so it's certainly grown really well this summer. I'm hoping to get a few more shoots from lower down to try and train into these lower cables, but it's always a bit more tricky getting a lower shoot. They tend to grow mostly at the tips, and right up high is where it puts most of its growth on. So there is a couple of suckers starting to come up from the base, and I've checked them, they are above the graft. So if I pan down here, you can see there's actually this really long one there, which I can train up, hopefully onto that cable there. So I need to do a bit of tying work and get this tied in. You can also see there's a good one here, and it was actually, and this one here was the same size as this time last year. I tied it in, and that's grown probably about 6 or 8 meters right down to that end sunflower, and that's given it a nice bit of support for there. And this spring it even made a side shoot, and I've trained it in onto this cable here, so it's grown really well. Coming down, the lavender is now in full bloom. This flowers for a long time actually. This will go right through to the end of summer. The lavenders do really well in this garden because it's such a sandy soil. It's free draining, so they don't get too wet and rotten, which is the main issue here in Scotland. They can normally survive the frost, but they don't like the wet. But if you've got free draining soil, this seems to do quite well even with our cold climate. Further along, we've got a few more sunflowers, and I can show you the passion flower here, which I planted this year. I'll maybe put a picture or a clip in now so you can see how small it was when I originally planted it. So it's amazing how much it's grown. It was pretty much just about the height of this stick down here. And I haven't done much training at all. It's been really well behaved. It's kind of grown exactly how I wanted it to grow. So it's naturally grown diagonally up. All I did when it came to this end was tuck it underneath here, and then it continues to grow naturally diagonally up that way. There's also a shoot down here which has actually started to grow diagonally up. I then tucked it round, and this should hopefully keep growing up there as well. I made sure it was well fed when I planted it, although it's starting to get some yellow leaves at the bottom now, and the leaves are a little bit paler, so I might give it another feed to give it a bit of a boost. It has recently stopped growing a little bit. I think that's partly because it had so many flowers. You can see basically every leaf from probably about this position right down to the stick. So basically every single new leaf that's grown has had a flower with it, so it's putting a lot of energy into these flowers now, which are looking quite nice. I was surprised how well it's flowered for its first year. I wasn't expecting such a good display. So I'll probably need to give it another feed, but also it's been made cold and cloudy the last 2 weeks. It's been around 15 to 16 a lot of the time as a maximum in the day, about 10 degrees at night. There was a touch of frost nearby, not here because we're near the sea, but about 10 miles away inland they did actually have -1, and even for Scotland that's a little unusual in July, but we can get frost at any time of year. So it's not doing so well, partly because of cold weather, cold cloudy weather, but also because it needs another feed. So I'll feed it, hopefully we'll get some warm weather again and it'll start growing again. But I've been amazed at how much it has grown, to be honest, and I think that warm spring really helped, so it's looking good. I'll just take you further around the side of the house. We've got some nice sunflowers here as well in full bloom. A lot of the sunflowers are going over. This one's looking particularly good at the moment, and it's always covered in bumblebees and honeybees, mainly bumblebees though, and they really seem to like the sunflowers. These are actually Russian giant varieties, but because they got stressed as I repotted them, I kept them in a pot a little bit too long, and if you direct sow them you'll get much bigger plants. But also with the poor soil, they've kept quite small, and you can see the other ones down there were flowering previously, but they've just kind of gone over now. So coming around to the other side here, there's also a couple of other Russian giant sunflowers. This one though looks like it's going to be just a little bit bigger than the rest. It's been a bit delayed in flowering, probably didn't get stressed, so that's going to be a particularly large one. This one as well is doing quite nice. This area had the most foxgloves. As I say, there's a couple of different varieties. There's kind of a white one and a pink one and a few different shades in between. The nice thing about foxgloves is they do cross-pollinate very well. So if you've got a white one next to a pink one, they'll cross-pollinate and then you'll get a real mixture of the two. So you can see this one, for example, is a bit white and a bit pink. It's kind of in between the two. But then if I pan out here, we've got a much darker pink one over there. So you can select to breed your foxgloves, and you can choose if you want lots of white ones or lots of purple ones. Just depends what you select, and you can actually control what flowers you get, which is quite nice. So there's lots in this area. Unfortunately, most of them have finished flowering. There's a couple that were later, such as that white one at the back there, which is just starting to come into flower. Most of them are finished or just going over. But as you can see from the ground here, there's loads of seedlings coming up. Lots of little young plants. So this area will be covered in foxgloves again this time next year. I'd like to finish this video with this rose here. This is a rose which was never labelled, but I think it's probably the climbing version of an Arthur Bell rose. It was labelled as a climbing rose, but I didn't have the variety. And to be honest, it's never actually grown as a climbing rose. It's always been quite small, never grown much more than about 1 metre or about 3 or 4 foot. But this year is the first year it's actually started to grow like a climbing rose. I think the reason for that is I've fed it. We never really fed this much in the past, and the soil is quite poor. But with a feed this year, it's put on some really nice glossy dark green foliage. The reason I think it's an Arthur Bell rose is the foliage doesn't have any disease. That's quite a good sign of an Arthur Bell, because they're really disease resistant, often have this dark glossy colour to the leaves as well. And also with the Arthur Bell rose, they start off with this very dark yellow with a slight hint of red just on some of the petals, just as you can see there. And then what happens is they go to a lighter yellow, and eventually they fade almost to a white. So it looks to me like an Arthur Bell, and with an Arthur Bell rose it has that great scent as well. So this looks like the climbing variety. You do get a climbing type of Arthur Bell. This one I'll need to do a bit more training because it's got quite big. Also needs a lot of deadheading. I deadheaded this last week, but there's already a lot of dead heads on it. What I need to do is deadhead them, and then these other ones can come on, it can put more energy into that. If I leave these, they'll just grow giant rose hips, and all the energy will go into the seeds in the rose hips. So if I deadhead them, it will allow more energy for this to keep growing. And you can see the number of flower buds on here, and it's quite unusual. Normally when you have that many flower buds you have lots of little flowers, but these are actually really quite large flowers on this plant. So I'll need to make sure they're deadheaded, so they can put all the energy into that. And it would be flowering better, but because it wasn't big enough to train as a climbing rose last year, I didn't actually prune it as a climbing rose. So what's happened is it's put on, instead of putting lots of smaller side branches in with flowers on each one, it's put on less branches, but they're much stronger and more vigorous. So at the end of each branch we get a lot more flowers. So you can see here you've got a load of flower buds. But the problem with that is they just get too congested. There's too many flower buds in one place for such a big rose. So what tends to happen is, although there is a lot of flowers, they get very congested and you can't fully appreciate them, and they just kind of get congested like that. And if we get rain, they kind of go rotten or mouldy. So what I'll need to do is prune this and lay it down on its side, basically the branches, to encourage side shoots. That will encourage much more of these branches like this, and that way we'll get these ones where they only have about 5 roses on the end of each branch, but we'll get a much better display, because instead of having a few branches with big clusters of flowers, we'll have a nice even spread over the whole plant with just a few flowers at the end of each shoot. For example, here, when this comes into bloom, you're going to be flowers all along here, so the whole thing is going to be covered in flowers and each one's not congested. Whereas this section, there's a big clear space here where there's not going to be any flowers at all, and then at the top it's just going to be congested, and so this display is not going to be at its best. So that's all for this video. Just finish off now looking down the end and at the rose flowering there. I'll give you guys an update maybe in a few months' time, see how the reblooming is doing with this rose, and possibly give it a prune as well.